Welcome to the Success is Subjective podcast series brought to you by collegealternative.org, presented by Lilly Consulting. I'm your host, Joanna Lilly. In today's episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Halie Devlin. Halie is the founder of Embodied Recovery Community, an online space for women plus who are recovering from participating in any destructive behaviors. She is also a somatic practitioner and facilitator, a sober coach, and a mother. Halie's mission is to empower you with practices and support to come to know and fully inhabit your body as a safe and sacred space so that you can recover your sense of self-trust, your authenticity, your sovereignty, your intuition, and your vibrancy. Her approach to the work merges science with spirit in a way that is grounded, accessible, and trauma-informed. Here's Halie. Halie, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. I'm like geeking out a little bit.
That's awesome. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm really excited because I get giddy when I know somebody, but I don't really know somebody. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I kind of am viewing you in this moment. And I'm very eager to hear you share some more obviously tidbits of your childhood and kind of young adult years so that I get an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So let's I don't even know where you grew up. Why don't you tell us, literally tell me and tell the listeners, where did you grow up? And then also what was the messaging that you were receiving, especially later in adolescence, about post-secondary education?
Yeah, thanks. So I grew up in the Bay Area, in the East Bay, specifically in a small town called Orinda. Growing up in the Bay Area was great and also not in some ways, but the kind of messaging that I got around post-secondary education was really that the deal was, it's you graduated high school, you went to a good college, you climbed the ladder of whatever career path you chose. And that was just how you were going to live your life. And that's what success meant ultimately. And I remember actually feeling so when I first applied to colleges, and I had navigated a lot of difficulty throughout high school, and I didn't have a horrible GPA, but I didn't have a great one, and so I got into a CUNY school in New York City called Baruch, and so I started out there, and I remember actually feeling this kind of shame about that it wasn't a good enough college, And so anyway, but I really wanted to live in New York City and I really wanted to get away from the West Coast. So that worked. And so I went there and I spent my first 2 years there. Part of my second year was actually studying abroad in Paris. And during that time, I got so homesick that honestly, for shits and giggles, I just applied to UC Berkeley, really not thinking I was going to get in. I just was oh, whatever, I'll just, who cares? I'll try. And I got in. And and it's funny because for years I would be oh, this was an admissions mistake, but which was really just kind of my own insecurity. But anyway, so I ended up moving back to California and somehow, even in the throes of my addiction, managed to finish and graduate from UC Berkeley. And to be honest, that was kind of something that I really clung to for a sense of self-worth. Was okay, I got into this school, but it was a very surface level self-worth. It wasn't I didn't have a true sense of self-worth. I don't know that college really affords us that. Maybe it does for some people, but it didn't really for me. So anyway, so that's kind of my little journey with that.
Well, I appreciate you actually talking about we're talking about multiple things, right? The definition of self-worth and how we each define it, because that is so subjective in itself. But then also you really hit on this piece of the shame that's associated with schools, right? We whether we actually talk about it or whether it's just kind of inherently known. Yeah. Here's a group of universities and colleges that are top tier. And then there's second tier and third tier, and the list goes on, and how you view the decision that you've made or the identity tied to the school and the name. Mm-hmm. It's just really interesting kind of navigating that being a part of who you are as a young adult.
Totally. Yeah. And, the kind of irony is that I actually feel I was getting a better education going to Baruch. I studied art history in college. Well, that became my major. And, at that point, first of all, I was just living in like a cultural center as far as art goes. And so I would have, these really fun assignments that required a lot of like critical thinking of like, okay, go to this museum and talk about the way that this exhibition is curated and how it relates to blah, blah, whatever. And just feeling like I would feel like lit up by my classes, and then I transferred to Berkeley, and don't get me wrong, there were some classes and some professors that I had that were top of the field and super, renowned and well respected and offered great education. But I also got a lot of classes that were like, memorize these 200 slides of Greek art sculpture and the 200, year range that it could have been created in, and then like answer a multiple choice test. And it's like, that's not what am I really learning in that? And so I just have always thought that to be so interesting, right? That it's like the name means so much, and yet that doesn't even necessarily always equate to quality of education, and isn't even necessarily comparable to something that might have, like a lesser name. So
I'm a little bit triggered in this exact moment because I had a Renaissance art history class in college. I think we're around the same age. And the exams were, the professor would flash a slide like up on the screen, right? Because we still did slides, and you would have to be able to regurgitate everything, right? Yeah. Like the title, the artist, the year, like, and the why behind the piece, or like anything in particular that was specific. But I wouldn't say that I walked away from that class being like, that professor was top of the field and they were amazing. I just remember, unfortunately, I do have a really strong Renaissance art history knowledge. Please don't ask me anything right now. But it was not my favorite class at the time. And so it's just interesting to, again, I think a lot of what you're talking about, and I love that you said, like, look, you were in the kind of the cultural epicenter when you were in New York, right? Like that, when you think of art, when you think of galleries, when you think of museums, I think of New York City. Yeah. So, and it's interesting, we totally skipped over the fact that you did a study abroad, because I also view that as kind of like a gap experience, which we can maybe talk more about right now or later. But I think, you're talking about 3 different transitions too, within like a very short amount of time, cultural differences, geographic differences, educational differences, like you name it. So I'm just kind of curious, you can dive in specifically to kind of each spot, or if you want to just kind of lump it all together, like what was the transition? What was college like socially and emotionally for you?
Yeah, great question. I'm also just really appreciating these questions because they're different than what I'm often asked. And so I'm like, ooh, this feels like really kind of fresh for me, which I just really appreciate. I would say that the transitions, just something to kind of be aware of is that in the midst of all that was arising for me, I was navigating addiction. And so when I would transition, I had that as what felt like a buffer at the time, because the reality is that I didn't have healthy coping skills to navigate transitions otherwise. And so often when I would transition, my addiction would actually like go on an uptick, And I remember often feeling, the thing that's so tricky about it when I reflect on it is that I didn't really have language for it at the time. I just felt a sense of like dis-ease in my body. But, when I look back, what I understand is that transitions caused a huge amount of anxiety for me. And I didn't know really how to talk about it. And I also didn't really have much in the way of support around transitions even having the potential to be kind of easeful. And so it took me a lot of time to kind of adjust. And in the midst of that adjustment, I would revert to more unhealthy kind of coping mechanisms. Yeah. And so, that feels true. And then what also feels true is that I, in many ways, had to adult at a really young age. And so I grew up kind of having this story about myself of self-sufficiency. And I think that that was real to some degree, but also the story of self-sufficiency generated a sense of isolation and like, I can't ask for help. And so, yeah, I realized as I was talking about it that I wanted to paint like a more full picture, and that feels important to include in it as well.
Well, and you think about it too, in that specific regard, no wonder you're leaning on substances as a way to cope, right? Because if you're, with every transition, anxiety is actually normal, right? For anybody, substance use aside, right? Like a move, a new environment, like setting in, getting connected to a community, like you actually have to lean into discomfort, because if you don't know anybody, it's completely new and foreign. And so, and if you're kind of raised, or the narrative is like, I'm on my own, right? Like that, then you cope how you can at the time. And more often than not, geez, young people, we're just like so ripe for getting in trouble and doing some like really dangerous things for coping skills.
Totally. Yes. That's, and I remember very much feeling this sense of like, I'm invincible. I can do this and it's fine, Yeah. But I also will say that, what felt like a saving grace in some ways for me in the midst of transitions was that not while I was in Paris, I didn't have a job while I was in Paris, but going to New York and then from New York back to California, I always had jobs because I was, I didn't want to be part of like the Greek system, and I was pretty shy, and so I never really had what felt like a college community experience that I feel like is portrayed often. But I would meet community in the places that I worked. And then when I was studying abroad, that kind of cohort that had, gone from New York City to Paris together, like we kind of had each other. And so that helped to some degree. But yeah, without that, like, oof, I don't know what I would have done. Because even with those things, I felt pretty lonely a lot of the time.
Yeah. So I know a little bit about what you're doing now, and it feels like there's a huge gap between graduating from Berkeley or anything related to art history to where you are now.
Yeah.
So, and obviously we can go out on a limb and say that you're doing much better now with transitions in life, but we'll get to that. In the meantime, why don't you kind of just fill us in? Like, once you graduated from Berkeley, then what?
Yeah. It's funny to talk about that period of my life because I'm like, God, I feel like I've lived multiple lives, But yeah, once I graduated from Berkeley, I moved back to New York City and I started working in the art world. And at first that looked like, internships in galleries, and then also a company called ArtNet that was like an online art auction company. And so then I was simultaneously waitressing. And so I would do my internships during the day, and then I would work at a restaurant at night. And eventually I was offered a full-time position at ArtNet in their prints department. And so I ended up working there and for really a year and a half or so. But I ended up getting fired from that job because of my addiction. And then I long story short, wound up moving back to California, where it took me, another year and a half to actually get sober. And then, through that journey, my recovery journey, I moved to Bend. I, started out doing things like teaching yoga and meditation, and then, learning more about somatics and embodiment and how we heal through trauma. And my work has just really kind of evolved from there. But, in a nutshell, it's like I went from working in the art world in a very corporate environment to like having a career that's like wellness and recovery focused, which I love so much, but it's also just a funny path. It's a funny path I've walked for sure. Not where I ever expected I was going to go,
Right. Totally. Well, and I even think like, honestly, a big part of the work that is done within the wellness and somatic, just like whole health space, it feels like it's still a part of the same side of the brain. Right. Like when we talk about creativity or just like, diving into that, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm certainly not a neurologist, so I don't really know. But to me, it's not the typical art, right? You're not working in a gallery, you're not, working in an agency or anything like that. But you're in a different lane, but you're still on the same highway. How about that?
Totally. Yeah, I agree. And I also think, at the end of the day, I chose to work in the art world. I didn't understand it at the time, but it's like, that's how I maintained a sense of connection to the things that brought me alive, and that's what somatics affords me now, is a connection to the things that brings me alive in a bit of a different way. But it totally feels like, a similar thing, just different avenues of approach.
I love it. Mm-hmm. So tell us exactly, what is it that you do? Like, what's your title? What's your job? What's the business? Like, tell us everything.
Yeah, totally. So right now, what I do has kind of two pieces to it. One is that I work with people in a one-on-one coaching capacity. I do sober coaching or somatic coaching, usually a kind of a combination of both. If we're doing sober coaching, we're definitely integrating somatics into it, but not everybody needs sober coaching. So sometimes we're just doing the somatic piece. But and so there's that. And then last year in January, I founded an online recovery space for women who are recovering really from any destructive behaviors. And so that's kind of another branch of what I do, but it integrates the same kind of work. So, recovery support and somatic work, and the kind of integration of those two things together. Mm-hmm.
Well, that sounds super cool.
Yeah.
Okay. At the very end, we will make sure that folks know how to connect with you for the coaching or get connected to the community, because I think that's also really important. But I'm going to ask you this question because I ask all of my guests point blank. Do you see yourself as successful?
That's a great question. Yeah, I do. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do, because I am doing work that I just believe in so deeply, and that's like deeply fulfilling to me, and that I witness every day as making a difference in people's lives. And I don't say that in like I'm the one that's doing that, right? Like, they're the ones that are doing it, but I'm getting to hold space for that work to occur. And to me, that's success for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I always love hearing people's responses, right? It's like I put you on the spot.
Totally.
If you can, because the reality too is like, it's open to interpretation. There's no right or wrong answer.
Totally.
It's how you interpret your own experiences and where you are now. So I'm never going to be like, and you're wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
but I love it. So if you could give some piece of advice, I mean, I always, again, I think that I pretend, let's be real, I pretend to make this as generic and open-ended as possible, but I believe that every time I have a guest on the show, by the time I ask this question, it gets really specific to like who you are in reflection of, where you were at during your young adult years. So I'm just going to ask that because I think it's important, especially for young women. If you could give some advice to a young woman who's struggling in transition, in finding a sense of community, in like kind of coming to the place of like, maybe I am towing the line with addiction or like all of the above, right? Like all the things. What advice would you give that young woman?
Yeah, there's a few things that come to mind. The first that feels just foundational is to find, at least if not, I mean, hopefully many, but a safe person that you can just be honest with, that you feel like you can share what's really going on and feel held and supported in whatever is arising for you. I think that many of us are privileged to have people like that in our lives. Some of us aren't. And that just means that it requires a bit more digging, and kind of seeking out those people. And there's just so many ways to do that, although it sometimes feels like there isn't. But that would be one piece. And then the other piece that's coming to mind is like that I think that, well, so if we're talking about the kind of addiction piece, what feels important to share is that there's just still so much shame and stigma around that, even though we live in like the most addicted society in history, you know? And it's such a human experience to have. And the shame tells us that we're not worthy of support and that we're not even worthy of sharing our story, because if we did, we're going to lose love or we're going to lose acceptance, etc. And I would say just to let people know that like that story is a lie and it's not true. And actually, like, no matter what a person has done or been through, every person is just inherently deeply worthy of love and belonging. And the sooner we can even open to the possibility that that's true, the sooner we're able to receive and seek support. And then, you know, when it comes to navigating just transitions in general, I would say like just being so gentle with ourselves. You know, I feel like we have often these messages, and where we receive them could be a whole other conversation, but all to say we receive these messages around like, oh, transitions should be perfect, or they should feel, totally easeful, or they should feel that we should have every single step mapped out so that the transition can be perfectly achieved. And that's just like, transitions are just inherently messy. And as humans, we're inherently complex and dynamic, and letting that be okay and being so gentle with ourselves around the fact that like, we're gonna make mistakes. We're gonna do things imperfectly. We're gonna feel like we have no idea what the fuck we're doing. I feel like we all probably feel that way on a day-to-day basis, and we're all just guessing, you know? And so like letting that be okay and a part of the process. And I know for me, transitions are always such an invitation to just like not take myself so seriously. You know what I mean? Like I could take myself so seriously. And that just creates this contraction in me and this impulse to avoid and make myself small and all the things. And when I can remember like, okay, I am one among many, and there's millions of people in the world, billions, navigating transitions in this very moment. And like, how I am is okay, and I can also bring like a lightness to it. Helps me to navigate the transitions with a little more grace oftentimes.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I could probably pull out like 7 different things at least from what you just said, like simple, like one-liners or like something like that could become a mantra. And it expands beyond the like female specific space, even though I asked you to kind of highlight that. I think that everything that you just hit on truly can work for any gender. Mm-hmm. And so, gosh, I'm so appreciative to hear that. I feel like I'm going to need to replay that little clip over and over and over, because there's so many nuggets of really good advice in there.
Yeah. Great.
So with kind of like, great way to like segue to how the heck do people connect with you, because obviously you're real and you also have really, you know, like in-depth knowledge, advice, you know, guidance, like you kind of exude all of those things. And so the right person really needs to be connected to you. So how do people connect with you?
Yeah. I mean, people can find me through my website, which is sacredgroundingwellness.com. I'm also on Instagram at Halie Devlin. And I'm also like, I'm on TikTok-ish. I'm still like, you know, I have mixed feelings about TikTok, we'll just say. but I am on there also as Halie Devlin. And so those are places that you can easily find me. Yeah.
I love it. I'm like giggling hard because there's me like and my shame bubbling up, because I'm like, you showed me all these things and I've done nothing.
Oh my gosh. No. Yes, I so get that. And I mean, truly, it's like we all have our own path with that stuff. And to be honest, I've actually been less present on social media intentionally lately, because I feel like it can kind of pull me from my center of like what it is that actually matters that I'm here to do, you know? And that's, I mean, just realistically speaking, and this is, I don't know if this is a sidebar. I mean, we can include this. I don't really care, but it's like, that's obviously important from a marketing standpoint to some degree, but also it's like, how am I cultivating and deepening into the relationships that already exist, you know, in my life and in my sphere? And sometimes the need to constantly post stuff just detracts from that, So
Yeah. Well, it's easy to get sucked into the role of consumer rather than content creator.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are a business owner, I mean, just to have the means for people to contact you, I think that's great, right?
Absolutely.
And if you need to take breaks, by all means, take breaks.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I keep going back to this term or the phrase, like the right people, the people that are meant
Mm-hmm.
to connect with you will connect with you at this point. So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I mean, Again, I feel like I have a little bit more information about Halie now, which is just super excited, basically, to know a little bit more of your history and hear about your young adult journey and leading to where you are now.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. I want to thank my guests for joining me on this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it weren't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for our next episode where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guest. Also, put a face with a voice by accessing their interview on the newly formed successissubjective.org website. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email me at Joanna, Joanna, at successissubjective.org. I would also be remiss if I didn't tell you to check out the collegealternative.org and lilyconsulting.com websites for additional resources outside of podcasting. If you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please do me a favor and subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to the Success is Subjective podcast on any other podcast playing app such as Audible, Google, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. Last but not least, Success is Subjective is listener-supported, made possible by me and by you. You can support this podcast by joining the Patreon community at patreon.com/successissubjective. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.